Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into soot-covered boots and trudging back to a place where the air is thick with smoke, your clothes are always singed, and your dreams smell faintly of boiled leather and molten iron. You are a medieval blacksmith. And no, it's not as glamorous as the video games made it look. The forge where you live and work isn't nestled in some picturesque woodland glade. It's wedged between the pig yard and the fishmonger's stall. And let's just say, wind direction is not your friend. You wake before the sun rises, not because you're inspired by a love of honest labor, but because the bellows are frozen stiff and need beating like a drum just to start breathing again. Your fingers crack as you reach for the door latch, and your breath fogs in front of you like dragon smoke. Except you're the dragon, and your treasure hoard is mostly rust. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The floor beneath your feet is stone, cold and cracked, and your boots, if you can still call them boots, squish slightly as you shuffle forward. You can't tell if it's last night's melted snow or the soup you accidentally kicked over during a midnight hammering session. Either way, your socks are wet and your patience is thin. The forge itself is still sleeping. The coals are gray and slumped like old bones, and the tools are scattered just as you left them, tongs resting crookedly on a half-scorched bench, hammers leaning together like tired old men. You reach for the flint, then remember it snapped yesterday. Wonderful. You resort to your backup method, scraping the blade of your smallest knife across the side of the anvil until enough sparks catch on to the wool-damp shavings. It takes a few tries. Your breath comes in short, puffy clouds as the fire finally catches, flickering uncertainly like a nervous candle at a haunted wedding. You crouch there for a moment, palms out, soaking in whatever warmth it's willing to give. Your bones creak. Not metaphorically, they actually creak. You blame the damp, and the job, and the fact that you haven't had a day off since the king's last tax collector choked on a goose leg. You hoist yourself upright, groaning as your knees protest, and shuffle towards the bellows. They're large, leathery, and smell faintly of horse breath. The straps are fraying again, and one of the iron rivets looks like it's plotting its escape. You give them a few good pumps. The forge groans awake like a moody teenager. You give it more. The flame leaps. The warmth returns. Welcome to your day. Outside, the sky has turned a dull pewter, a color that doesn't promise sun but threatens rain. Probably sleet. Maybe frogs, if you're really unlucky. Though that only happened once, and the jury's still out on whether it was divine punishment or just a very confused storm cloud. Back inside, you examine today's first task, reworking the hinges for Widow Elspeth's gate. Again, for the third time, because her son insists on hanging on it like it's a jousting practice dummy. You pull out the twisted metal from the corner pile and toss it into the fire. It hisses like an offended cat. As it heats, you set to work prepping your tools. The hammer handle is loose again, so you wedge a bit of leather into the gap. The tongs have a wobble. You ignore it. The anvil has a chip in one corner, shaped suspiciously like your elbow. You ignore that too. You wipe your forehead with a sleeve that's already dirtier than your doormat. And just as you start getting into a rhythm, heat hammer, flip, cool, repeat. The church bell rings, loud, echoing. And about an hour earlier than usual, you freeze mid-swing, hammer poised above glowing iron. That's not a call to prayer. That's the "oh no, something broke and we need a blacksmith now" bell. You mutter something that would get you slapped by a nun and reach for your second best cloak, the one without the burn hole. Outside, you slog up the muddy path toward the monastery. Your boots slip twice, and by the time you reach the archway, your left sock has folded under itself like some cruel medieval origami. Brother Anselm greets you at the door with his usual smile. "Ye great fire spirit," he says, eyes twinkling, like he's just invented that nickname. Again, you force a chuckle, the kind that says, "I would very much like to keep my contract, so I will pretend that joke isn't older than the bell tower." Inside, you're shown the culprit. A large soup pot with both handles snapped clean off. Brother Odo blames the impurities in your last casting. You blame the fact that they left it directly in the fire overnight, like it was trying to become soup itself. You go to work, reshaping the iron stubs, crafting new handles. A novice hovers nearby, asking questions, too many questions. What's iron made of? Why do you hit it when it's red? Can you forge a sword that sings when it swings? You answer as best you can. Then you lie. Yes, but only if the blade is fed honey under a full moon. He gasps. Your job here is done. The repairs are complete. They pay you half a wheel of cheese and an enthusiastic blessing. You're not sure which gives you more heartburn. Back at the forge, you set down your tools and glance at the slowly darkening sky. You've been up since before dawn, and your next job, a set of new nails for Farmer Hobbs' cart, is already overdue. You sigh, stoke the fire again, and reach for the last piece of iron in your stockpile. The day isn't over, not even close. You weren't always this tired. There was a time, long, long ago, perhaps during your first year as an apprentice, when the sound of hammer meeting anvil stirred something noble in your chest. Now it mostly stirs a dull ache in your spine. You started this journey the same way many boys in the village did, by being handed off to a master smith at the tender age of 10, with a bundle of flat bread, a knotted tunic, and far too much optimism. Your parents told you it was an honorable trade, one that would put food on your table and boots on your feet. They failed to mention it would also put soot in your lungs, burn on your wrists, and leave you dreaming in clanging rhythms for the rest of your days. Your apprenticeship began, as many do, with humiliation. On your first morning, you proudly picked up a set of tongs, only to drop them straight into a bucket of pig fat, because you didn't realize they'd just come out of the forge. You spent the next 2 hours scrubbing the smell out of your hands with sand and regret. Most of your days back then were spent hauling coal. Not the romantic, shiny kind you imagined, but crumbly, damp lumps that left trails of black under your nails and in the corners of your eyes. The only break you got from the hauling was when you were called upon to turn the bellows, an act which, you quickly learned, felt a lot like being cursed to manually inflate a dragon's lungs all afternoon. Your master, old Edric, wasn't cruel, but he had the emotional range of a pickaxe. He believed that yelling was just how one communicated efficiently over the roar of a forge. You grew to understand his moods by the pitch of his grunts and how violently he hurled scrap metal into the discard bin. When he was in a good mood, he might let you hammer a nail. When he was in a bad mood, you were the nail. You remember the time you tried to surprise him by sweeping the floor before he asked. Noble idea, tragic execution. You accidentally knocked over a full tray of half-cooked hinges, sending them clattering into the embers. Edric didn't speak to you for 2 days, not out of anger, just quiet mourning. One of your most cherished early lessons came not from your master, but from an older apprentice named Wolf. He took you aside one evening and whispered, "If it looks cool and shiny, don't touch it." Then he showed you the palm of his hand, which looked like a half-melted wax figure. You took that wisdom to heart. Still, you eventually earned your own shiny scar across your forearm. An unavoidable rite of passage, really. Historians still argue whether the medieval apprenticeship system was exploitative child labor or essential trade training. You, personally, would vote for yes. You got a roof over your head and a bowl of barley stew most nights. But you also lost 3 toenails and the better part of your hearing in one ear by the time you were 15. Still, there were odd moments of joy, like the time you were finally trusted to heat and shape your first real item, a humble horseshoe. It turned out a bit lopsided. Okay, very lopsided. The horse walked like it had secrets, but you were proud, and Edric only sighed once. That counted as praise. Your days began at sunrise and ended long after the stars had taken their positions. There were no weekends, no feast days off. The closest thing you had to a holiday was when the forge roof collapsed in a storm, and you spent 2 days helping rebuild it. The sky was open, the air was clean, and no one was yelling. Bliss. You learned to keep your fingers nimble, your reflexes faster than a flying ember, and your ego small enough to fit inside a smelting pot. You also learned to eat fast, sleep faster, and never ever question why your master kept a pair of tongs engraved with what looked suspiciously like a love poem. That was a story for another day. Maybe never. You got used to the aches, to the endless noise, to the fact that your hands would never truly be clean again, no matter how many times you plunged them into cold lye or scrubbed them with sand. You started dreaming of hammers falling and coals hissing, even when you weren't near the forge. Eventually, old Edric deemed you half useful, which in smith speak meant you were ready to start forging on your own. You didn't celebrate, mostly because you were too tired. But inside, some part of you was proud, like a plant finally breaking the soil after years of being stomped on by goats. Of course, forging on your own didn't mean creative freedom or riches. It meant doing all the jobs Edric didn't want. Mending chamber pots, reattaching cart handles, and making 7 identical nails for a man who swore each one needed a slightly different personality. You'd officially graduated from apprentice to full smith by the age of 20. No ceremony, no cake, just a nod from Edric and a new level of responsibility that came with 0 increase in sleeping hours. Now, years later, you find yourself repeating the same motions he once taught you, only your grunts are a little softer, your eyebrows a little more singed, and your patience for apprentices a little thinner. You've taken one under your wing, of course. A boy named Leoric, who once tried to quench iron in milk because it looked cooler than water. He means well. You still hide the milk. And as you stoke the forge this evening, wiping sweat from your brow with a sleeve that used to be cream-colored, you look at your reflection in the polished back of a frying pan you just repaired. Your hair is mostly soot. Your beard smells like bacon grease. And your eyes say,
It's only Tuesday. You shake your head and return to the forge. The iron's glowing. Time to begin again.
Not all metal is created equal. You learned that the hard way, probably while trying to forge something decent out of a lump of iron that looked more like a particularly judgmental potato. The truth is, medieval iron is, by modern standards, awful. Slaggy, impure, full of surprises, and not the good kind. More like the, oh, look, another invisible pocket of air that made the blade snap in half kind. You used to think iron was just iron, hard stuff, heavy, makes weapons. Turns out the stuff you get depends heavily on where it's mined, how it's smelted, and what phase of the moon the village witch is grumbling about. There are days when you swear your iron has a personality, and not a pleasant one. Some lumps are stubborn and refuse to heat evenly. Others crack without warning like a cranky old man in the middle of a sermon. You're not just a smith. You're a part-time geologist, part-time gambler. Every job is a toss of the dice. Will this chunk of metal cooperate? Will it warp like a day-old loaf? Will it mysteriously fall apart after 3 solid hours of hammering, right as you're polishing it for a client who once stabbed a goat for less? You've developed coping mechanisms, of course, like your sacred ritual of tapping the iron 3 times before working it. Technically pointless, but it makes you feel better. Also, that one trick you learned from a traveling smith. If it smells like rotten eggs when you heat it, don't use it. That one saved you from a very unfortunate incident involving exploding hinges. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths truly understood metallurgy or simply developed intuitive tricks through repetition. You're leaning toward the latter. You know your metal by how it sings when struck. A bright, ringing tone, promising. A dull thud, trouble. A weird twang that makes your eyebrows rise. Put it back. That one might be cursed. Occasionally you get good iron. Like truly good iron, smooth, even, rich in carbon. Where it comes from, no one knows. The trader just shrugs and says, up north somewhere. You don't ask further. You just take it, pay a ridiculous sum, and whisper sweet nothings to it like it's your one true love. Because let's be honest, on most days, your love life is your iron. Still, there's a certain charm in working with flawed materials. It teaches you patience, creativity, swearing under your breath in 5 different dialects. You've learned how to patch mistakes with clever joins, how to reinforce a weak spot with a thicker bevel, how to pretend something asymmetrical is actually a fashionable new style from the capital. You've also learned that sometimes you just fake it, not in a malicious way, just a survival one. When the village reeve insists on a perfectly smooth finish for his ceremonial blade, but the iron decides to include a lovely spider web of bubbles just below the surface, you decorate it. A little chisel work here, a bit of inlay there. Subtle, it's a blessing pattern. You even throw in a story about how it represents the duality of strength and humility. He buys it, he always does. Of course, the real test of your skill comes not with swords or axes or horseshoes. It comes with nails. Yes, nails. The humble iron nail is the bane of your existence. Why? Because they're small, annoying, and everyone assumes they're easy. Just make 100 or so, they say, like they're ordering sweet buns at a fair. They don't see you reheating each tiny blank over and over, trying to strike the head just right without squashing the whole thing. They don't feel the creeping hand cramp after the 70th one. They don't hear the soft whimper you lead out when you drop the last nail into a bucket and it sinks into the water with a splash that sounds exactly like you have to start over. But you persist because you're a smith, and stubbornness is as much a part of the trade as the iron itself. You make it work. You have to make it work. And every now and then, something extraordinary happens. Like the day the bailiff commissioned a decorative gate hinge with a lion's head on it. You had no idea how to carve a lion, but you tried. You stayed up all night, peering at a torn tapestry for reference. You chiseled and filed and whispered promises to the metal like it was your firstborn. And in the end, it looked okay. More like a dog wearing a crown, maybe. But majestic in a vaguely confused way. The bailiff loved it, called it ferocious, hung it with pride. Sometimes you wonder if that's the real secret: confidence. If you say something is beautiful, valuable, or strong, maybe it becomes so. Maybe every misshapen blade and uneven horseshoe is still worthy because you say it is. Of course, that doesn't stop people from coming back a week later with complaints. My gate squeaks. My plow bent. My sword snapped while I was waving it dramatically at my cousin. You nod solemnly, apologize, and fix it. Again. Meanwhile, you carefully note which batch of iron caused the problem and make a mental note to only use it for coat hooks and decorative hinges shaped like birds. You're not bitter, just practiced. By the time the forge dims and the coals settle into glowing embers, you've worked through 5 different jobs and at least 4 existential crises. Your tunic is crusted with sweat and grime. Your hands look like they belong to a golem, and your dinner is still sitting on the windowsill, half frozen and completely forgotten. You pick it up anyway, chew it slowly, and lean against the doorframe. Out in the street, someone's playing a lute badly. A dog barks. A chicken, where did that chicken come from, struts across your threshold like it owns the place. You exhale. Another day of questionable metal, creative solutions, and the occasional accidental masterpiece. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, because even when the iron's flawed, you still find a way to make it hold. Your entire day revolves around air. Specifically, how to move it fast enough, hot enough, and in just the right rhythm to keep a fire angry, but not furious. Too little airflow, and the forge sulks. Too much, and your coals roar like a dragon with a toothache. Welcome to your eternal, never-ending dance with the bellows. You start the morning with a few careful pumps, long, steady pulls to wake up the embers, like coaxing a sleepy bear out of hibernation. The leather sighs with age, creaking at the seams. One of the wooden handles groans ominously with every stroke. You keep meaning to fix it, but somehow there's always another nail to forge, another latch to fix, another villager to pacify with a clumsy artisan's shrug. The bellows are your forge's lungs, and like any lungs, they occasionally wheeze, stall, or belch smoke straight into your face. You've lost count of how many times you've gone to work, smelling like smoked trout, and you haven't eaten fish in weeks. Worse still is the blistering. Your hands, already decorated with the usual mosaic of burns and scrapes, develop fresh hot spots every few days. Little bubbles of betrayal that bloom just under the surface. You've tried wrapping them, tried rubbing them with pig fat, even whispered your own makeshift charms under your breath. Nothing works for long. Your palms are a battlefield, and the bellows our enemy general below is tireless, deaf to reason, and very good at catching you off guard. The worst burn you ever got didn't come from the forge itself. No, it came from a sneaky, ill-timed puff of air that caused a piece of slag to leap up and plant itself lovingly on your collarbone. You screamed, of course. Then you apologized to the visiting monk who happened to be standing nearby. Then you screamed again, because pain and manners can coexist. Historians still argue whether medieval bellows were a mark of technical ingenuity or just glorified misery machines. You have a strong opinion on this. Bellows are, in fact, an ancient punishment disguised as equipment. They operate on the principle of just keep suffering and maybe eventually you'll get enough heat to melt a spoon. You do your best to keep them going. A little oil here, a bit of leather patching there. You once tried to replace the cracked nozzle with a piece of goat horn, which worked until it melted. That was not your proudest day. Still, you need them. Without airflow, your fire is useless. And without fire, you're just a man in a smoky room hitting rocks together. Today, the job is particularly delicate. The village alderman has asked for a set of iron hinges as smooth as a bishop's goblet. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you assume it's supposed to sound expensive. The problem is, the iron he provided is second-rate, brittle. You test a piece with a few gentle taps, and it flakes like week-old bread crust. You know what that means. A perfect below session. You need heat that's hot enough to shape, but not so hot it turns your iron into ash. So you begin the rhythm. Pull, push, pull, push. The flame dances higher. You adjust the airflow by wedging a broken brick under the nozzle. A delicate balance. You add a pinch of charcoal powder. The color shifts orange, then yellow, then the deep, satisfying white that says, "I'm ready." You go to work. The metal sizzles as you lift it from the fire and place it on the anvil. The hammer rises, falls, rises again. A song begins. Tap, ring, hiss, tap, ring, hiss. It's a music only smiths know. And for a while you forget your blisters, your sore back, and the fact that your lunch is likely being pecked at by the neighbor's chicken. Then, just as you're turning the metal for the finishing curve, the airflow hiccups. You feel a stutter in the forge's breath. You glance back. The bellows are wheezing again. You sigh, abandon your piece mid-glow, and return to the leather beast, coaxing it back to life with the tenderness of someone trying not to punch an inanimate object. Sometimes you dream of new beginnings. Sleek, reliable, perhaps operated by foot pedal or pulley. But those cost coin you don't have. Because the last time you tried raising your rates, the baker paid you an apology scones and a suspicious handshake. You make do. Because you always make do. And because every now and then, a little magic happens. A hinge fits perfectly on the first try. A horseshoe clinks onto a hoof, like it was born there. Or you finish a gate that actually swings without complaint. You look up, sweat streaking your soot-covered face, and feel, for just a second, like the fire has smiled back at you. Today, though, that smile fades quickly. Just as you set the newly formed hinge aside to cool, a voice pipes up from the doorway. Did you remember to forge a left-handed one too? It's the alderman's apprentice, 18 years old, bright eyes. Never forged a single spoon. You blink, then you blink again. Left hinged, he clarifies. The gate opens inward, not outward. You turn slowly to the forge. The bellows groan. The flame flickers. Your eye twitches, and then very calmly, you pick up a fresh iron bar and begin again. Pull, push, pull, push. The fire breathes, and you breathe with it. because this is the rhythm of your life. Not glamorous, not clean, but steady, and every blister tells a story. You'd think, after years of beating iron into shape, you'd have earned some respect. But no, your customers may live long and stop talking. They are a special kind of challenge. They are, each in their own way, wonderfully consistent in their total misunderstanding of how blacksmithing actually works. Take the baker's wife. Lovely woman, always smiling, always polite. She recently asked you if you could just make the oven door a little more cheerful. You asked for clarification. She said she wanted it to open with joy. You still don't know what that means. You made it a bit lighter. She called it less soulful. Or there's Brother Odo from the monastery. He once brought you a bell clapper to fix and insisted it wasn't ringing holy enough. You tried to explain the properties of iron resonance. He just sprinkled holy water on your tongs and muttered something about divine calibration. Your personal favorite, though, has to be Lord Merrick's nephew, a young man who arrived in town wearing fur-trimmed boots and speaking with the careful diction of someone who had never lifted anything heavier than a goblet. He needed a ceremonial sword. Not too sharp, of course, just swordish, and spent 30 minutes describing how it should glint in a certain way when dramatically unsheathed at dusk. You suggested polishing. He suggested adding a silver inlay of a hawk mid-screech. You suggested more coins. He suggested exposure. Of course, you have your regulars. Old Tom, the cooper, brings you broken hoop rivets twice a week and pays in salted fish. Doesn't say much, but nods like a sage. You've forged an entire working relationship based on mutual sighing. You like Tom. Then there's the village reeve. He comes in at least once a month with a bent blade, a cracked clasp, or a dented helmet and always blames someone else. The sword was too brittle. The clasp failed under noble strain. The helmet dented because of wind. You've learned to just nod and quietly mutter, "It's always the wind." Historians still debate the level of technical knowledge among medieval consumers. Some argue villagers knew their tools intimately and could judge quality. Others believe most just banged things until they broke, then blamed the smith. You know which camp you're in. After all, how many times can one man return a plow blade and say, "I think the dirt is too sharp"? Sometimes you think it's not your craft they want. It's the illusion of understanding. They want to feel involved. So you let them talk. You let them tap the anvil, nod solemnly, suggest absurd changes, and feel like collaborators in your deeply blistered art. You've even started offering options. Want a smoother finish? That's the merchant grade setting. Want a few decorative swirls? That's the artisan twist. Want to pay late? That's called the prayer plan. So far, no one's noticed you're making it up. But every now and then, a job surprises you, like the day the weaver's daughter came in with a broken spindle hook. She waited patiently, didn't offer advice, and simply said, "I trust your hands." You weren't expecting that. You didn't quite know what to do with it. So you fixed it better than necessary, filed the edges smooth, polished the neck, and even added a tiny etching of a leaf. She smiled, said nothing, paid in fresh bread. That loaf lasted 2 days. You remember it. And it reminds you why, despite the headaches, you keep showing up. Of course, not all interactions are so gentle. There's always that one villager who believes they know more than you, like Barrick the tanner, who once insisted you were quenching wrong. He read it in a scroll, apparently. You calmly invited him to demonstrate. He picked up a glowing rod of iron bare-handed. That was the day Barrick discovered what a second-degree burn smells like. He hasn't offered feedback since. There are moments you wish you could work in peace. No consultations, no custom requests, just fire, iron, and the steady song of creation. But blacksmithing isn't just about shaping metal, it's about shaping expectations, diplomacy, emotional translation, sometimes outright theater. You've caught yourself explaining how the carbon content in this batch is slightly temperamental, while actually thinking, I hit it too hard and now it's weird, but let's pretend it's a feature. You've reassured knights that their blade has a spine like a serpent, when really it has a mild wobble you couldn't fix because your good file went missing 3 weeks ago, likely stolen by that thieving magpie again. And let's not forget the emergency jobs, like the time Lady Elfrida needed a decorative hairpin forged immediately before the harvest dance. It had to resemble a swan mid-flight. You gave her a seagull that looked mildly concerned. She loved it. Or when young Hob needed a locking clasp for a wooden box. You asked what was in it, he said, secrets. It clicked shut perfectly. The next day he came back and whispered, You're the only one who knows how to open it. That was mildly unsettling. You find humor in these exchanges, you have to. Because otherwise you'd scream. And screaming near a hot forge never ends well. At the end of the day, as you close up the smithy and sweep the floor with a straw broom that's more hole than handle, you glance at the slate board where you keep your pending jobs. 4 nails for the shoemaker. New hinge for the chapel gate. Decorative key for a chest that may or may not exist. Sword with flare for Merrick's nephew, still unpaid. Something called a cauldron vibe enhancer. You don't ask anymore. You sigh, lean your back against the wall, and listen to the quiet crackle of the coals winding down. You might not be famous. Your clients might never understand your craft. But tomorrow they'll come back with more stories, more nonsense, and more broken things for you to fix. And you'll fix them. One blistered, beautiful, exhausting piece at a time. Hydration was complicated in the Middle Ages, especially for someone like you, who works next to open flame all day, sweating out roughly your body weight by noon, and living in a town where clean water is, let's call it, a strong maybe. You've reached a point where your standard morning beverage is whatever liquid hasn't developed floating bits, and that, unfortunately, narrows the options more than you'd like. You begin each day with a ritual sip from your personal jug. Sometimes it's watered-down ale. Sometimes it's cider. Once, disastrously, it was goat's milk left near the forge overnight. You survived somehow, though you had very vivid dreams about talking anvils and were suspiciously kind to pigeons for 3 days after. Your water barrel, proudly located near the forge's back wall, is technically freeish, but by the time it makes the journey from the village well, sits uncovered during the weekly midge swarm, and gains a healthy skin of soot from the forge smoke. It tastes like sadness, but you drink it anyway, because what choice do you have? You've tried boiling it. You even built a clever little side furnace to do just that. But then Brother Anselm told you boiling water steals its spirit, and you haven't heard the end of it since. Now you just mutter a quick apology to the water and hope the spirits aren't listening. Truth be told, ale has become your most reliable friend. Low alcohol, homemade, and gently bubbling with mystery. You keep a skin of it nearby, tied to a rusty hook on the wall. It's warm by noon and slightly sour by evening, but it doesn't give you dysentery. That's good enough. Historians still debate how much medieval folks drank alcohol versus water. You could settle the debate. Yes, just yes. Always ale unless you want to spend the next 2 days discovering new and exciting ways your stomach can cramp. Today, your mid-morning break comes just after finishing a small batch of coat hooks, twisted iron with little curled ends, surprisingly graceful for something meant to hold muddy cloaks. You set them aside to cool and reach for your ale skin. It's empty. You stare at it. Blink, stare again. You know it was half full this morning. Then you hear the unmistakable sound of someone slurping. You step outside and find young Leoric, your apprentice, bless his hopeful little heart, sitting on an upturned bucket, smugly drinking from your ale skin like it's a goblet at a royal feast. You fix him with your most stern blacksmith glare, the one that suggests fire and consequences. He pauses, wipes his mouth, smiles. Oh, was that yours? You resist the urge to throw a horseshoe. Instead, you take a deep breath and mutter something about teaching moments before sending him to the inn with a single coin and very clear instructions. Return with drinkable liquid or don't return at all. While he's gone, you attempt to hydrate with a bowl of soup from yesterday, still sitting by the windowsill, now congealed into something between a meal and a science experiment. You poke it. It jiggles. You leave it be. You spend the next hour working on an iron trivet for the baker, who claims her pastries are burning because your last one was too aggressive. You're not sure how a trivet can be emotionally aggressive, but you file the edges a little rounder, just to be safe. Leoric returns eventually, beaming, and presents a jug that sloshes with promise. You take a sip. It's wine, not great wine, not even good wine. But it's liquid, vaguely fruity, and doesn't taste like mushrooms. You accept it as a win. You sit on the forge step for a moment, jug in hand, looking out at the road. The sun has climbed higher, and sweat beads on your brow like raindrops on a cathedral roof. Your tunic sticks to your back. Your boots smell like betrayal. And yet, the wine is cool. The breeze is lazy, and for half a second, you don't mind the soot under your nails. Then you hear it, the creaking of a cart, and the unmistakable sound of someone yelling your name like they've just discovered fire and want to blame you for it. It's the miller. And he's dragging something that looks suspiciously like the broken remains of a grain hopper. You drink deeply. Because hydration, in this life, is less about health and more about bracing for whatever happens next. You greet him with a smile that's halfway between friendly and please don't make me rebuild this from scratch. He launches into a speech about how the bolts just snapped, though the iron you gave him was probably fine. You nod. You've heard this song before. You haul the mangled thing into your workspace and inspect the damage. One bolt is sheared clean in half. The others? Bent like a drunk minstrel's flute. As he talks, you pour yourself a little more wine. Not enough to dull your judgment, just enough to soften your opinion of humanity. And once he's gone, after promising to return with payment by festival season, you set to work again. This time, you keep the jug close. You alternate hammer strikes with small sips. You time the bellows rhythm to the pace of your breathing. You imagine yourself as part of a machine, one that runs on heat, sweat, and fermented grape juice. Your mouth is dry, your shirt is damp, your soul, somewhere between exhausted and entertained, and still you work. Because the fire doesn't care if your ale skin is empty. The iron doesn't care if the water barrel is green. And the job? It never ever stops asking. So you drink, you sweat, you curse, you continue until the coals dim again, until the road outside grows quiet, until the only thing moving in the forge is the last curl of steam rising from the rim of your wine jug. Some days you question your life choices, not because you're a blacksmith. No, that part you've come to terms with. The heat, the grime, the occasional third degree eye twitch from below smoke, that's all part of the job description now. But the part that still gives you pause, the part that makes you look up from your anvil and mutter, "Really?" is this: you are also the village farrier. Why? Because you're good with iron, they said. Because horses need shoes, they said. Because clearly, the man who shapes plowshares and sword blades must also know how to hold up 1,200 pounds of twitchy horse muscle without being kicked into next week. You didn't ask for this life. It asked for you. Your first time shoeing a horse was educational. You were still an apprentice then, barely up to the horse's flank, and the beast, an enormous gelding named Firecracker, taught you 3 things. 1, hooves are sharper than they look. 2, horses do not care about your feelings. And 3, even a well-aimed forge hammer is no match for a startled rear leg. You limped for days. Your master laughed for longer, but you stuck with it because you had to. In the village economy, versatility is survival. So you learned how to read a hoof like a map. You learned the difference between a stone bruise and a thrush infection. You learned how to pretend you weren't terrified when a horse's eye locked onto you, with the ancient expression of "not today, human." Now, years later, you're competent, you're calm, you're also still very much not fond of horses. Take Martin, for example. Martin is today's project, a draft horse with shoulders like a cart and an attitude like a hungover priest. He belongs to Farmer Wyrick, who swears Martin is just a big baby. You believe him, mostly because Martin has the eyes of a baby and the feet of a battering ram. The forge is quiet when they arrive. Martin's hooves clop heavily on the packed dirt, and you can already see one of the rear shoes is loose, hanging off like a drunkard's sandal. Wyrick gives you a cheery wave. He threw it last night, he says, spooked by a squirrel. You nod, withholding comment. That squirrel has more job security than you. You set up your farrier tools beside the stable: nippers, rasp, clincher, hoof knife, and the last set of draft horseshoes you made, now covered in a fine layer of dust and not hope. You grab your apron and squat beside Martin's foreleg, murmuring the usual charms. All right, friend. Just lift your foot. Nice and easy. Martin lifts, then promptly slams it back down on your boot. You bite your tongue hard. Leoric, your apprentice, is hovering nearby with wide eyes and a piece of bread. Should I hold him? No, you say through gritted teeth, as you wiggle your now throbbing toes. Just watch and learn. Martin does eventually give up the hoof, after a tense staring match and a bribe of 1 withered apple from Wyrick's pouch. You cradle it like it's a sacred artifact and begin your work, removing the old shoe, trimming the wall, cleaning the sole. The hoof smells like damp earth and faintly of regret. You ignore it. One by one, you replace the shoes. It's grueling, awkward work. You're crouched under 600 pounds of horse with a hammer in one hand and nails in the other, trying not to think about how much of your spine is currently being compressed into a question mark. And still, there's an odd piece in it. The steady rhythm of rasp on hoof, the quiet clink of nail against iron, the brief, satisfying moment when a shoe fits just right, like a puzzle piece in a living machine. For all the annoyance, for all the bruises, you get why people respect this part of the job. It's more than brute strength. It's precision, patience, and maybe a bit of prayer. Historians still argue whether farriery in the medieval world was a specialized trade or just an added burden for blacksmiths. You, however, have no doubt. It's both. A burden, yes, but also a strange kind of art. An art performed while kneeling in manure, under a swishing tail with your ear uncomfortably close to digestive sounds that no one warned you about. And yet, there's pride in it, even as your knees scream, even as your shoulders ache. You finish the last shoe, stand slowly, with several alarming pops, and pat Martin gently on the side. He snorts in your ear. You'll take it as a thank you. Wyrick beams. He looks as good as new. You glance down at your dirt-smeared apron, your mud-caked boots, your aching joints. So do I, you say, deadpan. Leoric hands you a cloth. Was that the worst one? You squint toward the forge where another note flaps in the breeze, pinned to the post with a bent nail and written in what you suspect is berry juice. Need shoes. For Pa Ig urgent. You sigh. No, Leoric, that wasn't the worst one. He reads the note, blinks. Why would a pig need shoes? I don't know, you reply, and I don't want to. But you will find out. Because this is the job, because someone has to do it. Because in a village like this, when anything with legs loses a shoe, you're the first one they come to be it, man, mule, or confused barnyard animal. You walk back toward the forge, flexing your fingers, already calculating the size of pig hooves, and whether any of your pony-sized templates will work. Leoric trails behind, still processing the concept of porcine footwear. Do you think it's for traction? He asks. You grunt. Or maybe fashion? You grunt louder. He stops. Are we really going to make them? You turn, face solemn. Yes, Leoric. We are going to make pig shoes. And you do. Because that's who you are. A blacksmith, a farrier, a reluctant shoemaker to livestock great and small. And the job? It never, ever gets boring. There is a smell that never quite leaves you. It clings to your tunic. It settles into your beard. It haunts the folds of your sleeves. Even after a rinse in the river, it is the sacred, pungent perfume of a working blacksmith, equal parts scorched hoof, burnt grease, old iron, sweat, and a whisper of fermented turnip. No matter where you go, the smell follows. You are the human embodiment of slightly on fire. It doesn't matter if you're working the forge, shoeing horses, or repairing the same creaky wagon wheel for the 4th time by midday. You stink, like someone tried to roast bacon, using only misery and friction. And in a village this small, everyone notices. You step into the baker's stall to pick up your morning loaf, and the baker's wife winces. Goodness, she says, pressing a cloth to her nose. Been wrestling oxen again? You visit the tanner to repair a set of iron buckles, and he, notorious for reeking of lye and boiling hides, tells you, you smell like the underside of a thunderstorm. You try to ignore it. Really, you do. You wash. Sort of. There's a bucket by the forge, technically filled with water, often filled with blackish sludge. You use it. Splash some under your arms. Wipe your face with a cloth that might once have been white. It doesn't help. It never helps. The real culprit, you've come to believe, is the combination of hoof smoke and pig grease. See, when you're working with livestock, particularly the larger, grumpier ones, there are traditions. One of them is slathering the shoeing area in a thin layer of animal fat. It keeps the iron from overheating the hoof, provides a little glide, and makes your entire body smell like a badly maintained spit roast for the rest of the day. You used to care. In your younger years, you'd scrub for hours after a long day. You'd toss your apron over the rafters to air it out. You even tried rose water once. That was a mistake. The scent mingled with forge smoke and created something so horrifyingly floral, it made a passing friar sneeze into a sermon. Now you accept it. You are not just a man. You are a walking warning sign for anyone with a sensitive nose. And let's talk about your love life, shall we? Or rather, your theoretical love life. It's not that you're unkind, or unattractive, or poor. Well, okay, you're definitely poor, but no, the real barrier is simply that no one wants to embrace a man who smells like singed leather and regret. You had a near romance once. Her name was Merowyn. She sold candles and had kind eyes. She even brought you a sweet roll once, still warm from the oven. You made her a little iron brooch in the shape of a crescent moon. She smiled. You smiled. Then you offered to walk her home one evening. And she caught a whiff. She tried. She really did. But halfway through the walk, she started holding her breath. Then she pretended to remember urgent cabbage business and vanished into the night. You never saw the brooch again. Historians often wax poetic about the nobility of labor, the dignity of craftsmanship, the allure of the tradesman. What they forget to mention is that hard work usually smells like a compost heap wrapped in burnt wool. You've tried to improve things. You hung bundles of herbs over the forge, sage, lavender, and rosemary. It helped for about an hour. Then they caught fire and made the entire smithy smell like a pagan ritual gone wrong. You tried drying your tunic in the sun instead of near the fire. That worked until the local geese decided it was a fine place to relieve themselves. You even once stitched a little pouch of mint leaves into your apron lining. It made the top half of you smell like a monastery garden. The bottom half remained stubbornly dead badger. Lyric, your apprentice, has no such issues. He's young, clean, doesn't yet carry the stench of experience. He walks into the forge each morning like a breeze and walks out in the evening with barely a smudge on his cheek. You sometimes suspect he's made of wax. Why do you always smell like iron stew? He asked once. You didn't answer. You just gestured toward the anvil, where a horseshoe was cooling, and said, "Hold that thought." He did, and burned his fingers. He smelled like you for the rest of the day. By afternoon, the scent is part of your identity. People don't even comment anymore. They simply give you a slightly wider berth. You've cleared the church pews, cleared a tavern once, too. You told them it was a chemical reaction involving coal dust. In truth, you just dropped a ladle of bone grease into the forge and turned the air into an invisible wall of sorrow. But despite all this, you endure. Because of the stink, the soot, the ever-present haze of roasted iron, it means you worked. It means you shaped something, fixed something, created something that didn't exist that morning. You may smell like a dragon's laundry bin, but your hands have purpose. Your fire has meaning. And even if no one wants to hug you, at least you'll never be confused for a noble. It begins with a bell. Not the soft, distant chime of the chapel calling villagers to prayer, but a deep, resounding clang that rattles birds from the trees and makes your molars ache. You drop your tongs, stare at the forge, and mutter, "Not again." The church bell has cracked. Again. You should have known something was off when Brother Odo arrived yesterday, humming in a suspiciously upbeat tone and asking how much iron it would take to make a louder, more righteous sound. You told him it wasn't about iron, it was about shape, balance, and physics. He nodded, then promptly asked if painting a cross on the clapper would enhance resonance. Now you stand in front of the fractured bell, inspecting the damage like a coroner at a particularly noisy crime scene. It's bad. There's a split running right through the crown, wide enough to stick your thumb in. The clapper is dented, and the yoke looks like someone hung an anvil from it for fun. Brother Odo swears it happened during devotions, but you have your doubts. The man gets passionate. He also thinks hitting things makes them holier. You measure the crack with a practiced eye. Reforging a bell isn't like reforging a hinge. There's no patching, no clever riveting. It's an all-or-nothing job. Melt it down and cast it again. Which means building a mold, finding enough bronze, and convincing the monks to pay you in something more valuable than garlic and Gregorian chants. Brother Odo, bless him, pats the bell like it's a wounded puppy. "Can you fix it by Sunday?" he asks brightly. You stare at him. It's Thursday. He doesn't blink. You sigh. Back at the forge, you begin the long process of planning a bell recast. First comes the mold, 2 parts, pressed in clay, reinforced with straw and sheer willpower. You haven't done one in years. And the last time, the mold collapsed halfway through and left you with a metal lump that the reeve used as a doorstop for a decade. You start gathering materials, scrap bronze, copper bits, even a few melted down candle holders the abbey donated under mysterious circumstances. You mix it all with an expression of deep suspicion. Getting the proportions right is everything. Too much tin, and the bell will shatter. Too little, and it'll sound like someone punching a soup pot. Historians still argue whether medieval bell casters truly understood acoustic engineering or just copied shapes and prayed a lot. Based on Brother Odo's design sketches, one of which includes wings, you're pretty sure it was mostly prayer. You set the fire hotter than usual. Bell metal takes patience. You feed the forge with the good charcoal, the stuff you save for serious work, and station Leoric at the bellows with strict instructions not to sneeze, flinch, or get creative. Then comes the pour. The mold is ready, the metal molten, glowing with a sullen orange heat. You steady your grip. One slip, and weeks of work melt into the dirt. You tilt the crucible, breath held, and pour. It flows like lava, hissing as it meets the mold. You watch for bubbles, for seams, for that faint shimmer that says this might actually work. You wait. The mold smokes, cools, cracks slightly, but holds. The next morning you break the mold open. Dust and flakes tumble away, revealing something that almost looks like a bell. The surface is rough, the rim is chipped, but it's solid. No visible splits, no catastrophic flaws. You tap it gently with a wooden mallet. It sings, not beautifully, not angelically, more like a tired bard clearing his throat. But it's a sound, a true round tone. You'll take it. You lug the bell to the abbey yourself, muscles straining with every step. Leoric tries to help, trips, recovers, tries to whistle. You quietly ban him from speaking for the rest of the day. Brother Odo is waiting with a rope, a ladder, and somehow a loaf of celebratory bread shaped like a bell. He beams at the sight of your creation. It's perfect, he says, truly divine. You consider correcting him. You do not. Instead, you help hoist it into the tower, your arms trembling as the bell is nudged into place with a combination of prayer, grunting, and 3 increasingly panicked monks. Then, the moment of truth. Brother Odo pulls the rope. The bell swings, and it rings. A deep, satisfying tone rolls across the valley, startling birds, confusing goats, and making a baby cry somewhere in the village square. You nod, proud. Leoric claps. The monks cheer. And then, just as the echo fades, a small piece of soot falls from the tower ceiling and lands squarely in your eye. You blink, stagger, and mutter, "Of course," because that is the way of things. Even when the job is done, when the bell has been cast, the people rejoice, and the abbey smells faintly of victory bread. There's still a price, usually in the form of ash in your face and back pain for a week. But still, the bell rings. And that sound was made by you. Your tools are not glamorous. They don't gleam on the wall like a knight's sword. They don't sit in velvet boxes or carry names like Doomreaver or Lightbringer. No, your tools are more along the lines of that one with the handle that wiggles, or the hammer that sounds like it's crying. The truth is, your workshop is a collection of survivors. Bent, blackened, splintered veterans of 1,000 jobs, each one patched up, tied down, or held together by the sheer force of habit. You know them better than most people know their own children. You can find your favorite chisel in the dark by touch alone. You know which tongs bite too hard, which files protest with a squeak, which hammers balance like a dream, and which ones are liable to leap out of your hand mid-swing like they've just remembered a prior engagement. This morning, you begin your day as you always do, by muttering a quiet good morning to your anvil. You don't expect a response, it's just tradition. The anvil, as usual, greets you with dignified silence and a small spot of something sticky that you choose not to investigate. You reach for your best hammer, the one you call Old Crooked. It has a slight tilt in its head from a drop in 1293, and it's been a bit off ever since. But it works. You've used it to shoe horses, forge blades, and one memorable time, flatten a rat that had opinions about your grain storage. You trust it, mostly. Your tongs? Well, you own 6 pairs. 4 of them work. One has a wobbly arm. The other squeaks so loudly that you only use it when you're angry. The best pair is missing a jaw. You call them the quiet ones. And the below handle, the below handle. You carved it yourself during a winter blizzard. It has a little spiral on the end, which was supposed to look decorative, but mostly gets caught on your sleeve when you least expect it. You've thought about replacing it. Then again, you've thought about replacing everything, but that would cost coin. And coin is elusive. Last week, you tried to commission a new set of chisels from the traveling merchant. He looked at your payment, 5 bent nails, a handful of beans, and a very compelling story, and laughed until he coughed. You left with a whetstone the size of a walnut and a bruised sense of dignity. Historians sometimes paint blacksmiths as wealthy tradesmen, masters of their domain, respected, prosperous. You snort, maybe in the big cities, maybe if you're making armor for lords or lanterns for royalty. But here, in the village, you're paid in turnips, rumors, and the occasional questionable pie. You barter more than you sell. You fix more than you forge. And when you do get silver, it vanishes faster than steam on steel. A new rasp? That's 3 loaves of bread. A set of decent hinges? That's a week's labor and half your remaining patience. So instead, you improvise. You've turned broken blades into scrapers. You filed nails down into punches. You once forged a hammerhead out of melted horseshoe scraps and a bit of old plow blade. It works if you swing with enough love and very low expectations. Today's job involves fitting a latch on the tavern door. A latch that somehow needs to open smoothly, but with gravitas, according to the innkeeper, who once read half a poem and now believes he's a man of culture. You search your tool rack for the right punch, only to discover it's gone, vanished. You look around, check the bench, the shelf, the forge floor. Nothing. Leoric. You bellow his name, and sure enough, he appears from behind the shed, holding your punch like it's a soup ladle. I was trying to make a whistle, he says. You close your eyes, count to 5, open them. And did it work? He holds up something vaguely whistle-shaped, singed at one end. Kind of, you sigh. Put it back. He does, eventually. You return to your bench, still missing one corner from where a goat decided to taste it last spring, and retrieve a spare tool. Not perfect, not even close, but it will do. Because that's the secret of smithing. Not having the best tools, but knowing your tools. Knowing their moods, their quirks, their limits. You know that old crooked needs a twist at the top of the arc. You know your vise sticks in damp weather. You know that your old rasp works better if you hum while using it. No idea why it just does. And when things do break beyond repair, you don't mourn. You melt. You forge again. You give the old tools new life. There's an old piece of iron hanging on your wall, shaped vaguely like a horseshoe but curled at the ends, half melted and rusted beyond use. It was your very first forging attempt. It's utterly useless, but you keep it there as a reminder. Those tools don't start perfectly, neither do smiths. And somewhere in the middle of rust and soot and things that fall apart is the work. You've never been rich. Not once. Not even close. The day you found an extra copper penny under your workbench and bought yourself a plum was probably the peak of your financial career. And even that plum turned out to be mostly pit. But you didn't get into blacksmithing for the money. Well, actually, you did. Once. As a wide-eyed apprentice with soot-free fingernails, you imagined forging mighty swords for kings and getting paid in sacks of gold, or at least in meat pies and admiration. What you actually got was 7 years of burning your fingers, being paid in radishes, and occasional advice from old men who thought they invented iron. These days, you're considered the most valuable man in the village. Which is, of course, exactly why you're broke. Because people don't pay what you're worth. They pay what they can. And in a place like this, what can they usually eggs? Sometimes firewood. Once, memorably, a bag of onions, and a stern promise that God sees your generosity. You remember when the Lord's steward came down to request 5 spearheads for the manor guards. He handed you a scroll with the specifications, a slightly wilted carrot as a gift, and told you, the exposure will be good for your trade. You nearly exposed him to a red-hot poker, but you made the spearheads anyway, because if you didn't, someone else would. And even if no one else in the village can forge like you, someone somewhere always can. That's the cruel irony. Your skills are essential, but never rare enough to make you wealthy. You're too useful to be ignored, but not rare enough to be paid properly. Historians often write about the respect medieval blacksmiths received, the indispensable artisans, the backbone of village life. You'd like to remind those historians that respect and rent are two very different things. Take this week, for example. You've repaired a broken plow handle, paid in cider, a snapped cloak pin, paid in song, yes, song, two hinges on the chapel gate, paid in prayers for your eternal soul, a bent cooking spit, paid in an IOU scribbled on a chicken feather, and a rake, which no one claimed, and now leans silently outside your door like a sad, pointy ghost. Your one paid job was a set of shoe buckles for Lady Enid. And even that ended with her declaring, "I would pay you now, but I'm waiting on my cousin to return from York." You've never met the cousin. You doubt York even exists. Meanwhile, your expenses pile up. Charcoal doesn't grow on trees. Well, it does, technically. But then it has to be burned properly, carted in, and bought from that merchant who insists on measuring it by soul weight, whatever that means. Your leather supplies are running low. Your quenching oil smells like it's turned into soup. And your last good rasp now resembles an angry toothpick. Leoric suggested raising your prices. You laughed, not because it's a bad idea, but because the last time you tried, the miller stared at you like you just insulted his mother, his cow, and his bread in the same sentence. "But it's just iron," he said, "just iron." As if iron mines itself, smelts itself, hammers itself into the shape of a plowshare while humming a cheerful tune. You explained that it took 4 hours, 2 burns, and 1 full resharpening of your chisel. He offered half a cheese. You took it. Because you needed dinner. So you've gotten creative. You now keep a negotiation shelf near the forge. It displays random things people have paid you with over the years: dried herbs, carved bones, a slightly aggressive wooden spoon. When new clients come in, you gesture to the shelf and say, "I accept alternative currency." It helps, sometimes. Once a bard came through and offered you a custom song in exchange for mending his lute frame. You agreed. The song turned out to be a romantic ballad about your anvil. It was surprisingly catchy. You still hum it when no one's around. And then there's the barter system. Oh, the glorious, exhausting barter system. You fix the cooper's bands, and he gives you a keg of sour ale. You trade half of that for the baker's burnt rolls, which you exchange with the leather worker for a strap, which you then use to fix your apron, which lets you keep working on the cooper's next repair. It's a loop, a strange circular economy where no one has actual money, but somehow everything keeps moving. You survive, not thrive, not flourish, but survive. And on your best days, when the forge is humming and the coals glow like sunset, and someone hands you a decent loaf of bread with actual butter, you feel like the richest man alive. You bite into it slowly. Let the warmth fill your chest. And remember, you are not poor because you failed. You are poor because you're needed. And in a world that always wants more but never wants to pay for it, being needed is both a curse and a crown. It was supposed to be glorious. Your moment, your masterpiece. The culmination of years of soot, sweat, and softly whispered swears. You were going to forge a noble's blade, a real one. Not a hoe, not a hinge, not another frying pan hook, a sword. For a man with a title, for a house with a crest, for hands that didn't smell like hay and regret. And then the goat sneezed. But let's go back. It started with Lord Aubric, a tall, pale man with a narrow face and even narrower patience. He arrived with a retinue of armored clinkers and a blade wrapped in velvet. I need a replacement, he said, pulling aside the cloth to reveal a sword snapped clean across the middle. Make it finer than the last, lighter, but no less deadly. You nodded solemnly, asked about preferences, balance, pommel weight, fuller length. He waved you off. Just make it beautiful and sharp. You started work that very evening, cleared the bench, set aside all other jobs. You even told Leoric to stop talking for 3 whole days, which improved both morale and productivity. You selected your best steel, heated it carefully, drew it out inch by inch, folding, hammering, checking every line like a priest reading scripture. You shaped the tang, carved the fuller, and ground the edge until it shone like a sliver of winter moonlight. You worked late into the night, skipping meals, ignoring the strange ache growing between your shoulder blades. You were in it. Even Leoric noticed. You're smiling, he said one evening. No, I'm not. You are, like dreamily. You glared at him. Get me the quenching oil. He did. And you plunged the blade into the bath, listening to the hiss of steam and metal, locking into final form. It was beautiful. Maybe not a masterpiece by the standards of royal forges or the fabled smiths of Damascus, but it was yours, straight, balanced, sharp. You even inlaid a small motif into the guard, a curling vine with a hidden sparrow, subtle, elegant. And then came the goat. You laid the sword on a cloth outside to cool slightly more, under the open-air awning near the workshop. The sun was warm. The forge was hot. You needed air. You went inside to grab your polishing cloth. You returned to disaster. There it stood, the neighbor's goat. The same goat that had chewed 3 of your tool handles last spring. The same goat that once tried to eat your belt, staring down at your nearly finished sword like it owed him money. And then, as if directed by divine mischief, it sneezed, loud, wet, violent, right onto the glowing blade. You shouted. The goat bolted. You lunged forward, but it was too late. The sudden splash of cold goat snot had caused a rapid, uneven cool, a stress crack. You saw it the moment you lifted the blade, a jagged hairline fracture running along the spine, barely visible, but fatal. You held it in silence. Leoric stepped out, chewing on something. Did the goat just, yes? Is it? Yes. Should we? Don't speak. You sat on the bench for a long time, holding the blade. You'd never wanted to cry over metal before, but this one hurt. This one meant something. Historians still debate how often swordsmiths had to scrap nearly finished work due to flaws. You no longer wonder. You felt it. You didn't sleep that night. You reheated the steel, tried to salvage the tang, reforged the shape, but it wasn't the same. You rushed. You swore. The second version was competent, but not inspired. You delivered it 3 days later, wrapped tightly, jaw clenched. Lord Aubrich inspected it, gave a polite nod, and handed you a pouch of coin. Then said, "A bit plain, isn't it?" You nodded once. "Very fashionable this season." He didn't laugh, just walked away. Back at the forge, you took the cracked blade, the one ruined by mucus and fate, and hung it on the wall. Not in shame, but as a kind of memorial. You scratched a little note into the tang. Almost. Now, whenever a client asks how long a sword takes to forge, you just smile and say, "Depends on the livestock." Lyric doesn't let it go, of course. He made a song about it, a ballad called "The Blade That Got Sneezed." He sings it while sweeping, while filing, while hammering nails for the chicken coop latch. You pretend to hate it, you mostly hate it, because it's true, and because sometimes you have to laugh. Otherwise, you'll throw the goat off a cliff. Now, every time you make a sword, you double-check the awning. You keep the gate shut. You post a very stern sign that reads, "No goats beyond this point." It does nothing, but it makes you feel better. And that's the thing about being a smith. You don't always get glory. You don't always get respect. You definitely don't always get your goat-free masterpiece. But you keep forging, even when it cracks, even when it breaks, even when some horned menace sneezes on your dreams. Because maybe next time, the goat will stay home. There are many things you expect to come out of a blacksmith's guild feast. A sore back from too much sitting, the faint taste of questionable mead lingering for days, and at least one loud debate about the best quenching technique. What you don't expect, what you never planned for, is to wake up with a pounding headache, a mysterious iron ring on your finger, and half the village referring to you as the groom. It begins with a celebration. The guild's annual gathering is held each year in a rotating village, depending on who didn't host last time and who still has enough roof beams to support a dancing crowd. This year, the honor falls to Wormstead, a modest place known for its pig sausage and its surprisingly aggressive wheelwrights. You and Leoric arrive with travel dust on your cloaks, a sack of forged samples slung over your shoulder, and exactly 2 silver coins between you. But you're in good spirits. You always are at first. The forge is far behind. No one's asking you to fix a cracked hinge or shoe a goat with gout. For one night, you are not just the village smith. You're part of something bigger. A brotherhood of fire, iron, and stories told slightly too loudly. The feast is held in the great barn at the edge of town. There are torches hung between the rafters, trestle tables sagging with meat pies and stews, and a small stage in the corner where a hurdy-gurdy player is already working his way through a tune that may or may not be in a known key. You take a seat between an older smith from Greystone and a one-eyed fellow who introduces himself as Drem of the Drunken Forge. You're halfway through a tankard of spiced ale when someone claps you on the back and thrusts a bowl of stew into your hands. The flavor is indistinct, possibly lamb, possibly turnip, possibly regret. Across the table, someone catches your eye. Her name is Myra. She's introduced to you as Master Aldwick's niece, Aldwick being one of the most respected smiths in the region, known for his blade work and his tendency to fall asleep mid-sentence. Myra, however, is anything but drowsy. She's sharp-eyed, quick-witted, and apparently specializes in fine metalwork clasps, brooches, and jewelry. Too clean for real smithing, someone mutters. You disagree the moment you see her work. Delicate lines, perfect symmetry, small etchings so fine they could have been done by spider legs. You compliment her on a pendant she's wearing, a silver leaf wrapped around a teardrop of jet. She thanks you, then promptly says, "Your beard looks like it fought a fire and lost." You laugh, so does she. You spend the rest of the evening in conversation. Not flirting, not exactly, but talking like two people who understand what it means to spend their days with hot metal, and their nights wondering if their hands will ever stop aching. You exchange stories, techniques, jokes. At some point, someone brings out a bottle of elderberry wine. Then, someone challenges you both to a friendly forging contest. The rules? Simple. Forge something small, by hand, in under 15 minutes. No preheated iron, no pre-planned designs, just you, the fire, and whatever your mead-addled brain can manage. You agree? You shouldn't have. The fire is too hot. Your hands are too loose. But the laughter of the room surrounds you, and Myra stands beside you, her hair tied back with wire, already shaping her metal with the calm precision of someone who's done this 1,000 times. You, on the other hand, are improvising. You forge a ring. You don't remember why. Somewhere in your mind, it feels symbolic, circular, meaningful. When you finish, you present it to her with a clumsy bow. She raises an eyebrow, then forges one of her own slimmer, lighter, etched with tiny runes. She slides it onto your soot-blackened finger. You don't quite remember what happens next. There's a cheer. Someone toasts. The hurdy-gurdy strikes up a triumphant melody. Leoric is dancing with a roasted chicken leg. The night becomes a blur of firelight, noise, and the taste of honeyed ale. You wake up in a hayloft, alone, with a hangover pounding your skull like a millstone. Your boots are missing. So is your dignity. You stumble into the courtyard, blinking at the morning sun, and are immediately greeted by Leoric, fresh-faced, impossibly cheerful, and holding your missing boot like a trophy. "Congratulations," he says, grinning. You squint. On what? He holds up his other hand. In it, a small iron ring, the one you forged. "You're engaged?" You blink again. "To whom?" "Myra," he says. "You proposed after the second song. She said yes." Your head spins. "Did I kneel?" "You tried. You fell into a barrel of pickled onions." You spend the rest of the morning in a fog. You find Myra at the anvil near the barn, calmly shaping silver wire into a clasp. She looks up, smirks, and says, "So, about that ring." You stammer something about strong drink and stronger metaphors. She shrugs. "Could have been worse. At least you're not a Cooper." You ask if she wants to take it back. She says, "Why rush?" "It's just a ring. A good one, though, slightly off-center, charming." You part ways with a handshake. No wedding plans, no drama, just an understanding. Weeks later, a parcel arrives. Inside is a pendant, an iron sparrow, wings outstretched, etched with a design you don't recognize. It's tied with a string, no note, but you know who it's from. Leoric still teases you. He hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like a wedding march and calls you master husband. You ignore him, mostly, because truthfully, you're not sure what the ring means now. If it was a joke, a moment, a memory, or the beginning of something else, but you keep it in a box beside your forge, right next to the one marked projects that got away. Marriage doesn't come easily to a blacksmith. Not because you lack charm, though let's be honest, smelling like singed leather and goat grease doesn't exactly make you a regular in village courtship. And not because you're unkind. In fact, you consider yourself deeply loyal, reasonably honest, and only occasionally covered in soot. But mostly, marriage doesn't come because your forge comes first. Always has. You rise before the village rooster. You go to bed after the last candle flickers out. You spend your days elbow deep in glowing metal, and your nights half dreaming about bellows, pressure ratios. You've burned holes in 3 tunics, 4 relationships, and at least 1 mattress. That's not a life most people want to join. And yet, there's that ring, the one you forged during the guild feast. Crooked, slightly too thick, still hanging from a leather cord tucked behind your tunic. You tell yourself it doesn't mean anything, that it was a joke, a drunken moment, a mistake made under torchlight and too much elderberry wine. But you haven't taken it off. Not once. Life hasn't changed since that night. The forge is still the same. The work still arrives in frantic bursts. 3 broken hinges on Tuesday, a bent rake by Thursday, and, inexplicably, a request for ornamental pig shackles by Saturday. Still, something's different. You think about her, Myra, the woman with sharp eyes and sharper tools. You remember the curve of her silver work, the way she smirked when you stumbled over your own introduction, the way she hammered in rhythmic beats, like she was playing music only she could hear. You haven't seen her since that night. Not truly. But you did receive a small package, wrapped in wax cloth, tied with iron wire. Inside, a brooch shaped like a curled fern frond, its spine etched with tiny lines like veins on a leaf. On the back, stamped simply, M. You didn't show it to Lyric. You tucked it into your box of things not for barter. He noticed, of course. He always notices. Another love token? He teased. You ignored him, mostly. Because love is not something you've ever had time for. Not the long kind. Not the kind that asks you to take a day off or wear something not fireproof. And certainly not the kind that expects you to explain the blackened fingernails or why your left eyebrow is permanently a little shorter than the right. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the forge has dimmed and the only sound is the gentle breathing of the wind through cracked shutters, you think about what it would be like to share this life. Not the feast day version, but the real, blister-covered, half-soup, mostly silence version. You imagine sitting across the workbench from someone who doesn't flinch at sparks, who understands the rhythm of your hammer, who doesn't need you to talk about feelings, but who notices when your shoulders sag and wordlessly passes you the good oil for your hands. You don't know if that's Myra, but you haven't stopped wondering. Still, the village doesn't wait for romance. You spend the morning trying to repair a copper pot that's been dented in what the client described as a minor cooking accident. And what you strongly suspect was an attempted bear stew. You hammer it back into something approaching roundness, polish the rim, and return it in exchange for a sack of flour and a suspiciously large squash. That's followed by a visit from old Bram, who needs a new walking stick tip. Not a big job, but the man talks. A lot. You've learned more about his bowel schedule than you ever wanted to, but you smile, nod, and make the tip strong enough to stop a bore. Because Bram's walks have a way of attracting trouble. Then there's a knock at the door. A soft one, polite. Not the kind that says, "Fix my plow," or "Your apprentice broke my cart axle again." You wipe your hands and open the door. It's her, Myra, standing there like nothing has happened, like it hasn't been weeks since the feast. She has a satchel slung over one shoulder, her hair tied back in a knot, and a strip of silver wire looped around her wrist like a bracelet. You blink. She raises an eyebrow. Are you going to say something or just stare at me like I'm an unusually well-dressed goat? You step aside. She walks in like she's been here before, like she belongs. She glances around the forge, nods at the chaos, and then sets her satchel on the bench. I'm passing through, she says. Greystone's boring. Master Aldwych decided he wants to retire and spend his days whittling ducks. I need better challenges. You managed to speak. And you thought of her? She shrugs. Why not? You've got fire, an anvil, the worst-looking apprentice I've ever seen. Lyric passing by chokes on his bread. She grins. And just like that, she fits. You don't ask her to stay, you don't have to. By evening, she's helping you finish a set of curtain hooks for the chapel. She critiques your curve work. You pretend to be offended. She adds a tiny leaf motif without asking. You say nothing. But you leave it. Because it's better. Because maybe you're better too when she's nearby. That night, as the forge cools and you hang up your apron, you find yourself at the crooked table again, staring at the old ring, the one from the feast, the one with the off-center band and the uneven curve. You consider remelting it. Then you don't. Instead, you pick up a fresh strip of iron. You heat it, hammer it, file it smooth, and start again. Not because you have to, but because maybe, just maybe this time you want to do it right. Summer fair season arrives like a rooster on fire, loud, chaotic, and full of feathers in places they probably shouldn't be. The village square blooms with stalls, streamers, and the scent of overcooked meat pies. Children run around shrieking with glee. Someone has brought a trained goose. The bard is already 4 verses deep into a ballad about a haunted sock. And you? You're standing behind a makeshift stall with a display of hooks, hinges, horseshoes, and exactly one iron rose you made on a whim last week, which now feels painfully sentimental and wildly out of place next to the pitchfork heads. The fair is an opportunity. That's what they say, anyway. A chance to drum up new work, show off your skills, and maybe convince someone to pay actual coin instead of trading you for 3 cabbages and a loaf that tastes like roof tile. You don't mind the bustle, really. It's a nice break from the rhythm of the forge. You've polished your tools, oiled your wares, and even cleaned the soot from under your fingernails, which Lyric called a historical event. He's here, of course, wandering from stall to stall, trying to trade a set of ornamental nails for a meat skewer the size of his leg. He's also been serenading goats with what he calls romantic blacksmith poetry. You're considering disowning him, but fair day is fair day. You spend the morning answering questions from people who definitely don't want to buy anything. Could you make a sword like the ones in legends? Can you show a duck? Do you sell earrings made from actual anvils? You smile, nod, pretend to consider the duck question, politely redirect them toward the actual functional items that might keep your stomach full this week. Around midday, Myra joins you. She arrives with a small wooden box under one arm and a smirk on her face. You look hot. You glance down at your sweat-soaked tunic, your heat-reddened cheeks, your general air of slow combustion. Thank you for noticing. She opens the box to reveal a display of jewelry. Simple, elegant pieces, all forged by her hand. Spirals, leaves, birds. Things that speak of patience and clever fingers. You raise an eyebrow. Planning to outshine me? She shrugs. You brought pitchforks. I brought earrings. We serve different markets. You scoot over to make room. She lays out her work beside yours, and within 10 minutes, there's a small crowd admiring her craftsmanship. You try not to be bitter. You mostly succeed. One woman picks up a bracelet, eyes it, then turns to you and asks, "Can you make these too?" You nod. "Absolutely." Myra coughs. You amend. But hers are better. By afternoon, the music has grown louder, the crowd thicker, and the sun more aggressive. You've sold 3 hinges, 2 coat hooks, and shockingly, the iron rose, to a boy who immediately handed it to a girl, and then ran away, blushing. You like that boy. You hope she keeps it. Historians don't write about fairs like this. They talk about coronations, declarations, and battles. but not the slow romance of shared craft under fluttering banners, not the thrill of someone picking up something you made and smiling like it matters, not the simple joy of bartering a set of drawer handles for a pouch of roasted almonds and feeling like you just won the lottery. In the late afternoon, the contest begins. Not an official one, just a spontaneous challenge, called out by a visiting smith who's had one too many swigs of apple mead. Fastest forge wins! A ring, he declares. One piece of iron. One fire. One shot. Myra nudges you. You in? You glance at your stall, your aching feet, your half-eaten almond pouch, then at her. Always. You step into the pop-up forge beside the square, a crude setup with a borrowed bellows and a slightly scorched anvil. The crowd forms a loose ring, eager for heat and noise. 3 competitors. One apprentice serving as timekeeper, looking far too enthusiastic with his crude hourglass. The iron heats. You grip your hammer. Myra's already ahead, shaping with the graceful efficiency of someone who can see the end before she begins. You, meanwhile, rely on instinct. It's not your neatest work, not your most poetic, but it's strong, balanced, honest. In the end, Myra's ring wins. Of course it does. Delicate lines, a perfect curve, a tiny flower pressed into the band. Yours is a bit thicker, a little uneven, but it fits. She holds both up, looks at them side by side, then slides yours onto her own finger. Not bad, she says. You smile, because even if you didn't win, she chose that one. Back at the stall, the sun begins to dip. The crowd thins. The bard is still singing about the sock. Leoric has fallen asleep under the table with a sausage clutched to his chest. And you? You're cleaning up your tools, your wares, your thoughts. Myra's sitting beside you, quietly polishing a pendant. You glance over. Did you have fun? She nods. You planning to stay? She doesn't answer immediately. Then, depends. On what? On if you'll keep making rings like that. You chuckle. So, slightly uneven and rushed? She smirks. Exactly. You lean back, shoulders sore, heart full. The fair winds down. The music fades. The stars begin their slow rise over a sky still warm with the memory of day. And as you sit beside the woman who might be something more than a passing joke in the story of your life, you start to think this might actually be what joy feels like. Not the loud kind, the quiet, emberglow kind, the kind that lasts. War comes like winter, slow at first, with rumors and warnings, then suddenly, all at once. One day, the village reeve is complaining about rust on his shovel, and the next, he's posting a notice on the chapel door. All men of able hands and age are called to serve. All smiths must prepare arms and tools of war. You read it twice. Your stomach sinks, not because you're being drafted, you're not. You're too valuable behind the lines. Too essential, they say, as if that word warms your bed at night. No, you won't march with a sword. You'll stay behind and make the swords, and the nails, and the arrowheads, and the endless supply of horseshoes for cavalry that ride harder and faster than any peaceful field has ever known. The first week is a scramble. Young men report for mustering, all trying to look braver than they feel. The village buzzes with energy that feels nothing like courage, and everything like fear disguised as purpose. You're handed a list by a sweating steward from the Lord's Hall. 50 arrowheads, 20 spear tips, 24 nails for wagons, 4 emergency shoe sets. The list goes on. It always goes on. Your forge, once a space of methodical work and quiet pacing, becomes a clamor of noise and urgency. The fire never sleeps. The bellows groan. Your anvil starts to hum like it's caught in a chant you didn't choose. Lyric works beside you, jaw clenched, sleeves rolled high, hammering like he's trying to outrun the sound of the word battle. You don't ask him how he feels. He doesn't ask you either. That's how you know you're both thinking the same thing. You stop crafting beauty. There's no time for leaf motifs or decorative edges. Every movement becomes efficient. The goal is speed, not elegance, function, not flair. You forge arrowheads by the dozen, each one a sharp whisper of what's to come. You bundle them in sacks, hand them off to messengers who ride away without thanks. You sleep 4 hours a night if you're lucky. You eat standing up, bread in one hand, tongs in the other. Myra stays. You never really discussed it. She simply didn't leave. She moved her satchel to the back bench and started forging beside you, shoulder to shoulder. She makes belt clasps and buckle fittings, repairs armor straps brought in from surrounding villages, and on rare nights when things slow down, she etches small, hidden birds into the pommels of swords. For luck, she says. You pretend not to notice, but you see them. You always see them. One evening, as the last shaft of sun hits the forge wall, she catches you staring at a half-finished blade. You've stopped breathing, she says gently. You hadn't noticed. You exhale, hard. This one's for someone's son, you murmur. Maybe someone like Leoric. Maybe someone like me. She sets down her work, takes your hand. You don't have to carry it alone. You nod. You don't believe her, but you nod. Historians write of kings and generals, of victories and losses, but rarely do they write about the men at the anvil, those who arm the war, but never see its fields, those who forge the arrow that finds its mark, and live the rest of their lives wondering who it was meant for. By the second week, your hands are blistered again, like they were in your apprenticeship. Your muscles ache in that old, deep way, the kind of pain that settles into your bones and mutters, I live here now. The steward returns, now with even more urgent orders. Swords, he says. Good ones, 4 by Friday. You want to laugh. You want to ask what happened to the last 4. You say nothing, just nod, and get to work. You and Myra take shifts. One rests, one forges. You've built a rhythm now, wordless and reliable. Even Leoric falls into step, filing edges, stacking finished points, running errands when needed, no longer singing, joking. One night, well past midnight, you catch him staring at the embers. He doesn't speak, just watches the coals flicker. The light casts shadows under his eyes that you've never seen before. You hand him a mug of water. He drinks. And for the first time in a while, he says, I don't want to go. You nod, quietly. Then don't. They'll come for me. Maybe. He looks at you, waiting for something. Permission, maybe, or courage. All you can give him is this. Do what's right for you. We'll manage the rest. He nods, doesn't smile, but something in his shoulders loosens. He goes back to work. That night, you finish your 4th sword. It isn't perfect, but it's sharp, it's balanced. It will serve. You hang it on the wall for morning pickup and sit in silence with Myra, watching the forge fade from orange to red to ash. You think they'll use it well? She asks softly. You don't answer right away. Then finally, I hope they don't have to use it at all. She reaches over, lays her hand over yours, and for a moment the forge is quiet again, not from exhaustion, but peace. The kind that only lives in the spaces between things, between battles, between breaths, between the ring of the hammer and the silence that follows. The mornings have become quieter. Not empty, just softer. The clang of metal still echoes in the forge, but it no longer feels like a warning bell. It feels like music. Worn, familiar music, like an old song hummed under the breath. Myra arrives early these days, brushing ash from the bench before you even have a chance to notice it. Leoric, though still walking with a slight limp, has started teaching a younger boy how to shape wire. No one said it aloud yet, but everyone feels it. The forge is beginning to heal. But one morning, something interrupts that rhythm. A knock, not on your door, but on your expectations. A traveler stands there, dressed in a patched cloak the color of dust and wind. He carries a cart, though it doesn't rattle with goods like a merchant's would. Instead, it creaks with a single curious object, a giant gear, nearly half your height, made of iron and bone. He introduces himself with only a name. Isk, says he's a clockmaker. Or at least, he used to be. Clockmaker? In a village where most people can't read a sundial, you invite him in anyway? He examines your tools with the reverence of a priest, runs his fingers along the grooves in your hammer as if it's a holy text. Finally, he turns to you and says something strange. I heard the war never reached this forge. You don't respond right away. You're not sure how to. Instead, you motion to the gear. What's that for? He shrugs. Doesn't matter anymore. It was meant for a bell tower, but the town that ordered it no longer stands. His voice is too calm. He wants to trade. Not for gold, not for bread or boots or a place to sleep. He wants stories. I'll help you fix whatever you need, he says, in exchange for a seat by your fire and a tale every night. A strange request, but not an unwelcome one, so he stays. And each night, after the tools are cleaned and the forge cooled, you gather on the stone bench outside. Leoric, Myra, the boy apprentice, and now Isk. You tell stories, some true, some half true, some not at all true, but beautiful anyway. You tell of the first blade you ever ruined, of the time Myra tried to smelt copper and ended up inventing a greenish puddle you still keep in a jar. Leoric shares a story of a dog who once saved a tavern from a fire by dragging a bucket in its teeth. Isk listens, never interrupts, just smiles, and sometimes sketches what he hears into a battered leather notebook, his hands always covered in graphite and ink. In exchange, he teaches, not just you, but the village. He shows Myra how to align a gear with a watermill paddle so it turns more slowly in flood season. He teaches Leoric to file a hinge so precisely that it doesn't squeak even when soaked. He takes the children into the woods and shows them how to track time using shadows and sound, the rhythm of wind through leaves, the distance between crow calls. It's strange. You thought he was broken when he arrived. But now, watching him draw a perfect spiral with nothing but chalk and a carpenter's nail, you realize he's rebuilding, not just machines, himself. And the forge has become his clock tower. One evening, after the fire has dimmed, he hands you something, a coin, but not like any you've seen. On one side, an anvil. On the other hand, a flame. It's for your stories, he says. A token. When you feel like forgetting why you started, hold it. You turn it over in your palm. It's heavy, worn, but beautifully made. He must have carved it from leftover scrap, maybe even from the failed bell tower gear. And something about that feels right. The past repurposed into a reminder. Days pass, then weeks. The forge takes on a new kind of energy. It's no longer just a place to make things. It's where people remember who they are. A farmer comes in to repair a broken plow. leaves with a mended tool and a story about his grandfather's ox that once ran off with the town's mayor. A widow brings in an old iron ring, says it belonged to her husband. Ask if it can be reshaped into a brooch. You do it, she cries. Not because she's sad, but because it's the first time in years she's worn a piece of him without hurting. And one evening, when the sky turns that peculiar shade of copper just before a storm, a girl no older than 10 walks in holding a wooden toy sword. It's snapped clean in half. She looks up at you and says, "Can you make it brave again?" Not fixed. Brave. You don't laugh. You don't correct her. You simply nod. And you do. Because that's what this place has become. A forge for courage. A sanctuary for memory. A quiet corner of the world where even broken things can be brave again. Later that night, as the rain taps the windows and the fire hisses, you sit beside Isk. He watches the flames without blinking. Then he says, "Thank you." "For what?" you ask. "For making me feel like a person again," he says. "Not just a craftsman or a refugee or a story collector, but someone useful." You don't reply. You just hand him the token back. He shakes his head. "Number, that's yours. I've got everything I need now." You tuck the coin into your pocket. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like a payment. It feels like a promise that no matter how far the world falls apart, there will always be a forge somewhere and someone to keep the fire lit. The days are longer now. Not in hours. Those remain the same. Sun up to sundown, but in weight. Each morning feels like it carries an extra stone in your satchel, invisible yet undeniably present. The forge is busy, but not bustling. People come in quietly. They no longer ask for new tools. They ask for repairs. Spear tips, cracked buckles, twisted shoe nails. Always fixing, always patching, as if the entire village has agreed to just hold things together a little longer. Leoric, though healing, no longer sings. He works more slowly, with purpose, with silence. The laughter he once scattered like sparks is gone. You catch him pausing sometimes, staring into the fire, brow drawn, not in pain, but in memory. You don't ask what he sees. You've learned that silence can be kinder than questions. One day, a stranger arrives. Not a noble, not a soldier. A monk. He wears a woolen robe and carries a small curved knife. Not a weapon, but a tool for engraving. He says he's from the monastery on the hill, and that they're rebuilding the chapel doors. He needs hinges, strong ones, ones that won't buckle in damp or split under frost. You offer to make them for free. He insists on trading, so he gives you a book, not a new one. The leather is cracked, the pages smell of wax and damp, but the script inside is handwritten, Latin mostly. Some vernacular notes were cribbed in the margins. Sketches of plants, stars, and a diagram of the human hand. You don't understand most of it, but it feels heavy with meaning. That night you read it aloud by firelight slowly, mispronouncing every third word. Myra listens, head resting on her arms. Leoric dozes. The forge feels different, like a library pretending to be a blacksmith shop. You don't know what half the pages say. But it's the first time in weeks that your mind stretches towards something beyond swords and soot. The next morning, something peculiar happens. A child comes into the forge. He's 7, maybe 8, wide eyes, grimy cheeks, holding a bent horseshoe. You prepare to take it from him, but he doesn't hand it over. He says, "Can I try?" Now, technically, this is a terrible idea, letting children near hot iron and tongs, a disaster waiting to happen. But something in his face reminds you of yourself. Curious, restless, wanting to make something. So you nod, you guide his hands, you let him tap the hammer just once on cold metal. He beams, and then he runs off. Later you see him again, this time with two friends. They point at the forge like it's a cave full of dragons. You smile, and you realize something has shifted. The forge is no longer just a place of war prep. It's becoming a place of wonder again. A place of stories. You start keeping the book on a shelf near the hearth. Visitors begin flipping through it. One older man claims he recognizes one of the herbal sketches, brags about how his grandmother used the plant for toothaches. Another woman says her uncle once built a still that looked just like the moonwater machine drawn on the back page. Historians still argue whether that device was actually meant for distillation or just a very elaborate chicken coop. You begin to understand something important. Blacksmiths don't just shape metal, they shape memory. Tools become relics, swords become legends. Even a broken hinge can tell a story. Your forge is filling with stories now. A boy who bent a nail on purpose just so he could ask how to fix it. An old widow who brings in her late husband's belt buckle, asking if you can turn it into something less lonely. A traveling potter who trades you a bowl with painted vines for a pair of spoon molds. You've gone from wartime production to quiet alchemy. One evening, Myra stays after dusk. She doesn't talk much, just polishes a few tongs, then begins engraving something into the wooden beam above the hearth. You peer over her shoulder. It's a single word. Still. She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to. Still here. Still burning. Still making. Still us. That night you dream, not of war, but of children hammering copper into coins that mean nothing and everything. Of Leoric telling bad jokes while engraving a sword with a fish instead of a wolf. Of Myra laughing, truly laughing, as she pours a perfect horseshoe mold and it spits like a kettle. Of the forge glowing brighter than the moon. You wake smiling. And for the first time in what feels like seasons, you believe the village might not just survive. It might grow. And so, the fire stays lit. Not because the war demands it, but because the people do. Because stories need a place to be forged. And hearts, even weary ones, need heat to keep beating. And tomorrow someone will bring in a cracked kettle. And a child will ask why the anvil rings the way it does. And you'll show them. You always do. By this point in the tale, the forge no longer smells only of iron and soot. It smells like stories. Of old boots drying beside the hearth, of wax and wood smoke, of something sweet, almost like honey, but older, deeper, scent like parchment kissed by firelight and rain. You never thought a place could remember. But this place, somehow, does. And one quiet morning, when the mists are still hanging low and the birds have not yet begun their gossip, someone comes. Not a knight, not a customer, not a smith. A woman, alone, on foot, wrapped in a wool cloak too fine for this muddy road, her boots too delicate for the stones beneath. She walks like someone who has wandered long past her map, yet still carries the certainty of purpose. She steps into the forge without knocking. The others look up from their work, but she doesn't speak. She walks slowly to the anvil. Not the new one, no. The old one, cracked and slightly tilted. The one no one uses anymore. The one that sits quietly in the corner, half swallowed by cobwebs and memory. From beneath her cloak, she produces a bundle wrapped in linen. You watch as she gently unwraps it. inside, a sword, no ordinary blade, long, slender, and slightly warped near the hilt. The grip is worn smooth as if held too tightly, too often, not polished for show, but lovingly cleaned. Recently. This, she says softly, was my brother's. He forged it himself, before the war. You nod. No one asks which war. There have been too many. She places the blade on the old anvil and lays her hand on it, just for a moment, as if asking permission, as if saying goodbye. Then she looks up at you. I don't want it fixed, she says. I want it remembered. And that is something entirely different. So you begin, not by heating the forge, not with hammer or tongs, but with silence. You clean the blade gently. You trace the lines in the steel with a cloth soaked in cedar oil. You don't straighten it. You don't sharpen the edge. Instead, you inlay it. A fine line of silver across the crack, like a scar traced with moonlight. You ask her softly, was he a sailor? She seems startled. How did you? You point to a tiny engraving near the hilt, barely visible, almost worn away. A wave curling into a spiral. She smiles, almost despite herself. Yes, she says, before the forge, before everything. So you add to it a rising sun on the other side, a mountain behind the wave, a journey completed on land, on sea and beyond. When you hand it back to her, she holds it like it might vanish, like memory itself. That night she stays, not to speak, but to listen. And one by one, as if called by the flicker of the fire, the others begin to tell their stories. Isk speaks of the time he tried to smelt copper and ended up with something green, bubbly, and entirely unhelpful, but beautiful in its own confused way. Leoric tells of a sword that was never drawn kept above a child's cradle to scare away nightmares. And you? You tell of a woman who came walking through fog with a sword full of silence, and how the forge remembered her. When she finally rises to leave, she does not say thank you. She does not need to. She leaves a single feather on the bench from a seabird. And somehow, you understand, her brother is home now, not here, but in memory. The next day, you find a letter slipped under the door. There's no name, just 4 words. This place mends silence. That afternoon, someone else arrives, not with a weapon, but with a wooden spoon, cracked at the neck. I know this is silly, the young man says, eyes darting nervously. But it was my grandfather's. He always stirred porridge with it, said it made it taste right. You take it, and you don't laugh. You carve a new handle from oak and inlay the old one within it like a memory tucked into a new spine. When you hand it back, the young man tears up. And you realize you're no longer a blacksmith, not entirely. You are a custodian of memory, of grief, of laughter pressed into tools, of silence wrapped in steel. You begin keeping a little book by the fire. You call it the ledger of lost things. You write short entries. Small bell, cracked from a dog's collar, returned to a widow who still sets food out at night. Silver thimble dented, belonged to a tailor who never finished her last coat, polished and gifted to her apprentice. Each object, a memory. Each person, a quiet echo. And every time someone enters the forge now, they pause, just for a breath, just to listen, not to the fire, but to the weight in the air, the weight of stories waiting to be honored. And slowly you realize the memory anvil, old, cracked, imperfect, has become the most powerful tool in the forge. Not because it shapes weapons, but because it shapes belonging. And in a world still full of war and wandering and forgetting, that may be the most sacred thing of all. The bell tower is quiet. You've stopped noticing the exact hour it rings. Lately, it feels like the bell forgets you exist. Or maybe it's you who no longer listens. There's work to do. Soot in your ears and your knees have their own weather forecast. The blacksmith's forge never really sleeps, but you do. Now more than ever. You rise more slowly. You grip the edge of your work table like it's the edge of a cliff, and you lower yourself onto the stool as though any sudden movement might fracture you. It's not fear, exactly, just the growing awareness that one day soon, someone else will be heating the iron. And you're okay with that. Mostly. Because you've started dreaming again. Not big dreams. Not the dreams of youth, where you save villages with a hammer swing. These dreams are softer, like falling asleep inside a memory you didn't know you'd kept. You're in the meadow behind the workshop. The barley is high, and someone's humming. You wake up before the face turns around. It's always like that now, glimpses, echoes, but they come sweet and slow like honey poured into warm milk. You take what they give, and the forge still hums. There's a small comfort in how little it needs you. You've built it well. Isk handles the hard striking now. The apprentices, loud and lopsided, ruin fewer hinges than they fix. That counts as progress. You mostly shape handles now. Small things. Keys, drawer pulls, curtain rods for the baker's daughter. No one needs war spears anymore. Or if they do, they go to the city smiths with their hydraulic bellows and Latin price lists. You prefer the sound of your rasp over conversation. But once in a while, an old client stops by. They bring bread. They bring news of births. They ask if you remember when you forged the gate for their father's orchard, back when the trees were too thin to hold their own shade. You always nod, even if you don't, because it's a kind of lie, and kind lies, like soft leather, stretched just enough to fit. One day, someone brings a bell. Not the clanging call to arms kind, a small bronze one, hand cast, the sort you'd tie to a goat or a walking stick. The boy says it's from his grandmother's shelf. Said she wanted to give it to the man who made her wedding horseshoes. You almost laugh. You've made thousands of horseshoes, but you take it, set it beside the hearth. It doesn't ring, but you like its shape. And for days afterward, people kept mentioning bells. I swear I heard a bell when I passed the chapel. That little bell. I dreamt about it last night. It was floating. Even Isk says, "The bell makes my joints feel younger." Which obviously it doesn't. But you don't say so. You just polish it now and then, let it sit in the quiet. Let it do whatever old things do when no one's looking. Because you understand now, things outlive us. Not just anvils and stone steps, but touches and names, and even the way a room smells when it's held. Decades of burnt oak and wet wool. And sometimes those things remember. They remember the rhythm of your footsteps. They remember the way you cursed when you bent a nail wrong. They remember the songs you never admitted you sang alone at night. And that bell? Maybe it remembers the sound of you before you sounded tired. You start walking slower. Not because you can't move fast, but because you notice more when you don't. The sound of iron cooling in water. The weight of snow on your roof. The space someone leaves behind when they're no longer around. And one night, when the shop is closed and the wind pushes softly through the cracks, you lean near the hearth, pat the old bell and whisper, "If I'm forgotten, let it be gently." The bell does not ring, but your shoulders loosen. Your breath feels wide. And in the distance you swear someone's humming. Now the coals have dulled, and the tools are silent. The night stretches like old leather, soft at the seams, your benches warm from hours of stillness. And beyond the shuttered windows, the frost has settled on roofs, on fences, on the quiet of everything left undone. Your hands are calm now. They've made enough, held enough, let go of enough. And the forge, like you, finally rests. You let your breath slow. Each exhale's a lullaby to the bones. You picture the bell small, patient, still, waiting for nothing, needing nothing, just existing in the hush. Maybe you are the bell now, a vessel for memory, a note half held, the thing people remember when they don't know why they're remembering. So you settle. You fold your fingers together, feel the warmth in your chest, and release the weight of the hammer, the shop, the names etched in door frames. Let it all float, like smoke above a sleeping village. Let it all fall away, and just for a moment, be held by the quiet, that deep old quiet that asks for nothing and gives everything. Sleep well, blacksmith. The bell will keep your place.